Okay, hello everyone. So you're filing in, welcome. Welcome to, this is the Brooklyn Rail's 568th New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, the program's associate here at the Rail, and I have the real privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Lizaveta German, Lesia Kulczynska, Katarina Ruban, and Slinko. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of some actions. Today's conversation will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you can view the full archive of the series. I'm going to introduce Katya Grokhovsky, who we have been really fortunate to be connected with for this series. She's been doing a lot of organizing for this, as well as Adriana Farmiga. We're really so lucky to have you, Katya, and everyone else join us today. Katya Grokhovsky is a Ukrainian-born New York City-based artist, educator, curator, and founding director of the Immigrant Artist Biennial. She is a recipient of numerous awards, fellowships, grants, and residencies. Her work has been exhibited and performed extensively. And I'll turn it over to you, Katya. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you so much, Brooklyn Rail, for hosting us, part 2 of our discussions. I'm going to pull up my document. So I'm going to introduce our guest and welcome our guests today and our moderator, Slinko. And all right, without further ado, Lizaveta German co-edited the books The Art of the Ukrainian 60s and Decommunized Ukrainian Soviet Mosaics, contributed to the educational website Cultural Project and Sense, and lectured on contemporary art at Kiev Academy of Media Arts. Most recently, in collaboration with Maria Lanko and Boris Filanenko, Lizaveta co-curated Fountain of Exhaustion, presented at the Ukrainian Pavilion at the 2022 Venice Biennale. Kiev-based curator and visual studies researcher Lesia Kulczynska is affiliated with the research platform of the Pinchuk Art Center. She worked as a curator at the Visual Culture Research Center and Set Independent Art Space. She is the author of Meaning Production in Cinema, Genre Mechanisms, and several other publications. Scholar Katarina Ruban is a PhD candidate in history at New York University, finishing a dissertation about abortions in the Soviet Union. Before coming to the US, Katarina was a part of the Visual Culture Research Center in Kiev. Working and living in Ukraine and the US, she has published numerous articles on current political events in both Ukrainian and English. Welcome, everyone. And last but not least, Slinko, who's our moderator today, is born in Ukraine. She's a multidisciplinary artist living in the USA. Her practice is rooted in travel and research and is informed by history and social anthropology. Slinko has been awarded the Jacob K. Javits Fellowship and several residencies such as Cohedin, Henry Street Settlement, Izolyatsiya Foundation in Kiev, Banff Center, Triangle Arts, and many more. Thanks everyone and welcome. And I'd like to give the mic to Slinko.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katya, and thank you, Brooklyn Rail, and thank you most of all to our panelists. Everybody can hear me, right? Okay, great. So we have 3 panelists, all women. 2 of them have small children. So if you hear something on the background, it's just part of life. You know, you have to support them regardless. I will briefly describe how our questions are structured. So I'll give kind of like a very short paragraph before each question, so the general audience kind of gets a bit of a context, and then I will read out a question. There will be 3 general questions to the entire panel, and then there will be 3 questions directly for each panelist because of their specific interest and background. So the first question, all the questions are, of course, in the context of the war. And so the first question is the war over history. Since the independence of Ukraine in 1991, Russian Federation has steadily evolved its anti-Ukrainian narrative and its repurposed history to serve its recolonizing ambitions. It mobilizes two basic human emotions, love and hatred. Russian Federation insists that Ukraine is a brotherly nation tied to the Russian world by century-old common culture, faith, and language. It also argues that Ukraine as a nation state has no right to exist. This contradiction between brotherly love and hatred betrays the logic of imperial power and that can neither accept nor understand the existence of Ukraine as an entity independent from Russia. So the question is, how are Ukraine and Ukrainians fundamentally different from the identity constructed by the Russian narratives? Anyone on the panel, please?
May I?
I can start. Katerina, please, no, you were. I think you were the first one to raise the hand, please.
Okay. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail. Thank you, Slinko, for inviting us and for hosting this very important and timely conversation. So answering this particular question, I'm going to refer to my own experience as I've been in the US academia for quite a while. And I would say that this narrative of common culture, common language, what's called like this post-Soviet Eastern European region, it's basically not just and this idea about everything that the Ukrainians and Russians has in common. It's not just something that is coming from Russia. It's not only Russian narrative, but it's also how the production of knowledge, let's say, is structured here in the US academia, where like the Russian, Slavic, Eastern European departments, they are extremely dominated by Russian studies and by people who study only Russia. And basically, for them, Ukraine is just some kind of, like variation or just some kind of addition to Russian studies. So they are basically supporting this narrative. Supporting this narrative that there is this kind of the region where like with this like common language, common culture, and common faith. And I was extremely angry and surprised, for example, reading in the New York Times an article by a professor from I get from Pennsylvania State University, who is like sharing, whose idea is like this, that in Ukraine there is like people who are Russian speaking, they represent the Russian culture. So the idea that it's still like basically the same narrative that Putin and Russians promote, that basically in Ukraine we have the space for Russian culture, so like it's like common culture. But I would say that it's a huge misconception because I think that culture it's not separated from political life. And if you see a very different political life in Ukraine and in Russia, basically it says that we have two very different cultures. Because it's like political life that shapes Ukrainian culture, and it has been very, very different for centuries. And of course, with language, it's very simple colonial situation. That's why we have so much Russian language in Ukraine. It's something that can be quite easily understood in the, like, for example, of Spanish language or English language. And with with faith, or with like let's say religion or church organization, we can see how different Ukrainian diverse religious struggling like different organizations from this let's say one single monolithic Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. So that's just some basic ideas.
Sorry, Lizaveta was also.
Yeah, just to catch up with what Katerina was saying, I think it's like what we like this idea of the brotherhood of nations, and this idea of of Ukraine being like as a little brother, like my minor brother, minor sister. I don't know if to use like more feminative version, has a very precise, very particular historical roots, and this idea came not that long ago, or it was shaped in the way that we know it now, not so long ago, mainly in the 50s and the 60s. And there is a brilliant book I want to refer to, because I'm not historian myself, and so I also don't want to maybe elaborate too much. But there is a brilliant book by Ukrainian born Canadian Ukrainian historian Sergei Yakelchik, which is called Stalin's Empire of Memory, which was translated from English to Ukrainian like something like 10 years ago, and the title was a little bit dehumanized. So in Ukrainian version it was just Empire of Memory, so the Stalin's name was crossed out, which perhaps makes sense, but the original title was Stalin's Empire of Memory. And in this book, Yakelchik, so it's a very kind of document-based book. It's not just like his elaborations or his reflections, but it's basically the analysis of a number of documents, which shows in a strikingly precise and strikingly obvious way how a certain number of political decisions made by both Moscow. Sorry. My assistant.
I have warned the audience.
Yeah, right. You're right. So in this book he just like illustrates, and as I said, like in a just strikingly straightforward way, how a certain political decisions made both by Moscow-based, let's say like center-based, and also by Kiev-based politicians and cultural workers, how these decisions and this political actions shaped this very idea of the Brotherhood of Nations, which was which was also based on a. I'm very sorry. Okay. And how the complete history of Ukraine was reshaped, and how the very concrete historical moments in Ukrainian history, for example, like this union made by Bogdan Khmelnytsky with the Moscow Tsar back in 16th century, how it was all reshaped in a little bit of perverted way in 50s of the 20th century. And when you read it, when you just see how precisely and how like very kind of I don't know, brutally the historical facts were perverted and were changed, were transformed, and how the further history that we're still kind of experiencing, that the Russian Federation still bases its narrative on, how in fact how fake it was and how artificial it was. And I think the was something which, just to come back to the question, what would be the main difference of Ukraine, of Ukrainian identity from Russia, from this narrative that Russia tries to establish, is that what we can do now as a nation, and what the world can do also together with us, is to learn this lesson and to go back to history and to do a very critical, very precise revision of what was written 100 years ago, what was fakely constructed 100 years ago, and to recognize it, but recognize it in a critical way, also facing the fact that some Ukrainian politicians were all like Soviet Ukrainian politicians, Soviet Ukrainian scientists, historians, art historians were involved in that, and only by recognizing it and by recognizing it critically, by facing the fact that it's also like our own fault in a way, that some history lessons were not learned and were not criticized when it was the time for that. Only in this way, I think we can fight this narrative in a really productive way. So coming back to question, I think the main difference of Ukraine now from Russian may be that we are ready to critically face our own past and to rewrite it, not to kind of not only to contribute to this old narrative, because what we see in Russia now is that this old good narrative about based on the world victory in the World War II and all this kind of stuff, that this narrative is never criticized, but it's only been more and more established, more and more strengthened, more and more cemented, you know. But what we as Ukrainians can do is to basically be critical about this narrative, but also about our own past with its kind of good and bad sides.
All right, and now if Lisa wants to join in.
Thank you so much for the question, for inviting us, and thank you, Katya and Lisa, for this historical perspective, which I think is very important. And also, I agree with Lisa that it's very important to take the responsibility about our contribution to this, construction of these narratives. But my answer to this question is more like theoretical one, because I think that like the very idea of the identity, like it's a fake always. I mean, because identity implies that like a huge amount of people share some like certain common features, which is not possible by definition. That's why I think, like for me, I think that we fight in particular. I mean, our fight in this war is also for the right to be different, because Ukrainians are in fact very different, and it's historically that different like communities, different groups of people, different territories has like different historical background, it's different languages, different ethnicities, different like religious practices. So it's true that Ukrainian society is very diverse, and it has a lot of antagonisms inside. It has a lot of like even conflict, which I think is not bad. So it's like every time the project to construct some certain like unified identity is failed, even from inside Ukraine. So I think for me, our fight with Russia in this war is also a fight to be different, not to be defined by someone else, not to be identified by someone else, but to like for every person to choose its or his or her own identity. This is very important, because a Russian project is more like about creating some like totality, some defined identity for Russians and for all the neighbors, let's say. And also I liked your point, Slinko, about this love-hatred issue, because I also thought about that. I think it's like interesting that you crossed that you point attention to that, because really like this aggression from Russia towards Ukraine reminds somehow this aggression or the rage of rejected lover, but like patriarchal lover, who doesn't admit, who doesn't recognize your right to love someone else. And it's interesting because I researched a little bit of the Soviet cinema of the period of Second World War, and there was like the whole bench of films dedicated to the topic of faithfulness, like faithful wives or unfaithful wives. And it was like the whole like very strong ideological like narrative that the wife who betrays her husband during the war, let's say, it's like a collaborant or an enemy or a traitor. It's like very a lot of efforts were put to blame this, let's say, unfaithfulness. And I think this is something about this type of love, of brotherhood love, as you said. It's a love that doesn't recognize any right for choice, right? Any right to choose. And another point about this love-hate issue that I was also thinking about, but from the part of Ukraine, from Ukrainian part, is that that recently there was a lot of like hatred towards Russian culture, and all this council and like attempts to cancel the Russian culture and so on. And my assumption is that this hatred is also kind of a flip side of love, because to be honest, the particularly mass culture, Russian mass culture, was very powerful in Ukraine, and many people loved the Russians, like TV series, loved Russian movies, Russian music, Russian YouTube bloggers, artists, and so on and so on. And I mean, this mass culture, and not only mass culture, created some kind of libidinal ties with Russia. And some libidinal investments from the side of Ukraine. And these libidinal ties, when you love someone, you trust this person, right? So this love that was created by culture created certain trust, certain idea of feeling of intimacy, that these people are like us, that we can understand them. And even before the war, I had a conversation with one woman. I discussed with her the news about the upcoming war, and I was like worried about the war. And she told me, "Oh, I'm not afraid of the war at all, because the worst thing that could happen is that Russians will occupy us. And I'm not afraid of that, because they are kind of our brothers. They are similar to us. There's someone that we can deal easily with. So I'm not afraid of it." And I think, and you know how this happened, how the occupation turned in reality. That's why this trust that has been created by culture was kind of fatal for many Ukrainians, you know. And that's why I think that this hatred toward Russian culture is also, you know, it's some like intuitive recognition that this culture created this love toward those people who didn't kill us, you know. It's very dangerous. So it's kind of recognition of this capacity of culture to create this love bonds, you know. It's not even about,
if I just may,
yeah.
I think what you're talking about is abusive relationship, when the abuser keeps telling you, I love you, and then they beat you up. So there's like a real great sense of betrayal. So yeah. I wouldn't even say if it's necessarily hatred from Ukrainian side, but it's mostly like this deep sense of betrayal, that there's no coming back from this.
Exactly. Okay. Yes, and also it's not only a betrayal, because it's like when you love someone and this person like contribute to this feeling, and then it just hurts you or kills you, you know. It's an even much more dangerous situation. So that's why so many emotions about Russian culture, you know. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we have other questions that we can kind of maybe pick on that as well. So the second question is the war over self-definition. As we all know, Ukraine is located at the geopolitical fault lines between the West and Russia, so these spheres of influence, which makes it for a very difficult geographical and political place. And this puts Ukraine in a position of always having to choose its alliance either with the West or with Russia, or as recently has been proposed, in the state of neutrality, whose integrity and safety must be guaranteed by bigger geopolitical actors. It has become obvious to the world recently that Ukrainians were very instrumental in attracting financial and military assistance, which honestly surprised both Russia and West alike. We were given this kind of 5 days to hold out for Kyiv to fall, and then 3 months later, we're still fighting. So the question I want to pose to my panel is, what means and strategies Ukraine has or needs to have in order to maintain its independence and self-definition on its own terms? Anyone? Okay, Lizaveta wants to start, please.
Yes, thank you. And I want to start also with referring to what Lesia just told, because it's really would be part of my answer, is that the Ukrainian identity is very, very diverse and very complicated and very, very not not smooth, not even, not monolith. And you know, if to kind of broader the definition of your question a little bit, so we can also, you know, think about Ukraine not in terms of division between West and East, like Europe and Russia, but also between, like, let's say, North and South, if I may use this sort of definition, because and this will give also a new perspective to Ukraine, because the division that has been artificially made prior to the first Maidan revolution, to so-called Orange Revolution 2004, was the division was made between West and East. So this kind of people of the eastern part of Ukraine, so like Donbass, but not only Donbass, were claimed to be like originally pro-Russian or pro-Russian by default, because it's like the Russian or like Russian speaking, Russian thinking place. And then there is like so-called Western Ukraine, like based around Lviv and Uzhgorod, which is the kind of pro-European, which is nationalistic. So this was very artificial division made prior to the Maidan, which was, as we now understand it, of course, and we which is not, you know, not so complicated to follow, which was made precisely to as a first step to prepare the war we are facing now, you know, to kind of to separate the country. But also we can look at Ukraine in a more diverse way. There is Ukrainian South, there is Bessarabia, there is southern part, which is much more connected, like culturally, mentally, to Moldova, this Bessarabia region. Or if we look at Mariupol, which is now, you know, doesn't exist anymore, as we can say, as a city, which has a very strong bond, very strong connection to Greek people who originally were living in this territory. So we can look at Ukraine, you know, in this kind of axis of south and north. And also, if you're thinking about the north in a more geopolitical way, we can see how the great support, for example, of the Baltic countries, which I refer here as the north, you know, and suddenly these like 3 Baltic countries have become our like greatest partners and greatest friends, not only on the level of financial support, but also on the level of understanding and of very deep understanding of the situation we're facing in. I must say that I haven't heard more deep and more profound understanding of the situation Ukraine is facing now, rather than from colleagues in France, from Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia. But also this kind of division between North and South, and if we're thinking about North, also gives me a reference to the deeper history of Ukraine, coming back to Kiev's Rus, Kievan Rus, which, and you know, if we look at the history, we can remember that the first Kiev princes, Knyazya, were coming originally from Scandinavian countries. So again, Ukraine has this very diverse, very complicated, very mixed historical roots, which has also northern part of the world in its core basis. So if talking about Ukrainian identity, I would today I would use as many references, as many connections, as many dots to be connected to one another as possible. And in this way, Ukraine can be also an example to the world, how truly like multi-diverse, multinational, multi-thinking the country might be. And I think what this full-scale war really showed and really revealed is that all these divisions, which we were talking a lot about in the previous 10 years between West and East, between like Russian speaking and Ukrainian speaking, is so fake. Because when suddenly the war starts, the country becomes united. It doesn't mean that all the tensions and all the problems we have, also as Lesa said, you know, all the tensions that exist inside of the country, they're not gone, of course. But this war, if we can say that this war is, you know, if I may allow to say that this war made anything good to us, to Ukrainians as a nation, is that it showed that a lot of the problems we were fighting with inside of the country are real fake, are just the political construction, and they just evaporate when, you know, when politics step back and the real kind of human relationship step in.
Yeah, that kind of touches on the basic function of identity as a form of consensus. So the consensus is greatly improved and enforced even in the face of a common enemy. So who is Katerina or Lesia wants? Okay, Katerina, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I totally agree with Elizaveta and Lisa that, and like it's continuing the previous question, that basically this great means and strategies that Ukraine has to maintain its independence is actually Maidan itself. It's a kind of basically the unique mechanism, let's say, of the Ukrainian political life that shows. I don't really like this term society, but basically it shows how alive is Ukraine as a as a society, as a kind of like people in Ukraine, they have very strong sense of their own subjectivity, of like that they have very that they feel that they are like full political subjects who are responsible for their common for their collective life, and they're responsible for their individual life. And that's something that we do not see in Russia, which is like very status. So it's like everything is concentrated in the state. So Maidan is basically something internal that really makes Ukraine independent. But with this external threats for Ukrainian independence, there are so many, and it's not just Russia. Russia is an obvious threat, but unfortunately, what I can see from how the Ukraine's war is discussed here in the US and in other countries. So there are many intellectual groups, many political actors, many people who really do not see this war as a just war, the war that is worth fighting, as a war for independence and self-definition. So for many people, let's say here in the US left, in the let's say Jacobin magazine and other like leftist groups, this war is a war which is conducted by Ukrainian state, which is corrupt, which is militarist, which is kind of like a war machine that kills. So in this way, it's basically all these arguments. They are arguments also against Ukrainian independence and against Ukrainian self-determination. So these arguments, they say that no, you don't basically have the right to be independent. You need to basically to surrender to Russia and just be a part of Russia. And also the huge threat for Ukrainian independence is a very dangerous misunderstanding of what contemporary Russia is. That there is still not enough, I would say, understanding that Russia is a fascist state that basically threats not just Ukraine, but it's a threat for the entire Europe, and it's a threat for the entire world. So Ukrainians are basically fighting not just this war just for the independence of the country, but they are fighting for the future of not just Europe, maybe for the future of the world.
Lisa, would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, when I am thinking about this question, when I'm thinking about this, like independence, like my first thoughts are quite pessimistic, because as we see now, like our world constructed the way that the only way to be independent is to be kind of a superpower. Because if you are not a superpower, as we see now in Ukraine, you can be attacked and by those who are more powerful than you. Those who have more weapon, more money, more strength, can easily violate your borders, can kill your people. That's how we function now, unfortunately. That's how our world is functioning. So if you want to be independent, you have to grow the same like strengths, have a lot of like atomic weapons and so on, which is not a way out, of course, right? That's why I think when I'm thinking about this question, I think more about the dependency, because I know it from my own experience that I was, it's like funny coincidence that just before the war, I was working a lot with my psychoanalyst exactly on the issue of dependency, independency, and so on. And I was like trying to become more independent at different fields of my life. And then when war started and I had to leave Kiev with my little kid, with no savings, like in the complete like unknown future, I felt that I'm completely dependent on other people who are willing to help me, who hosted me, who give me some support, and so on and so on. And that's actually the truth. That if you are not a superpower, you have to realize that you are weak, you have vulnerabilities, you can't be like threatened. And that's why we need to think how to somehow create this communal mechanisms that would support and protect each of us. So my point is that we need not to build independence, because if we try to build independence, then we should grow the weapon, the army, so on and so on. And in the end, we will become a threat to someone else. But my point is that we should embrace our dependency on each other and build these ties, build this like a community, like worldwide community that would react in situations when more powerful state tries to attack the less powerful state. Then there is a community who would step, into the situation and would protect, because that's the reality. If we have this huge inequality in the money and in weapon, then no one is safe actually. Then those who weak is always threatened, and we see now that we tried a lot. And I appreciate that after the Second World War there was a lot of efforts to create this structure that would protect us, but now we see that it's not working. So probably we should work more and try to create something else, some new structures. Thank you.
Yeah, this is quite illuminating point you're making about independence, the price for independence, and the mechanisms that would have to be engaged, which is seems to be exponential militaristically and ideologically. And this idea of dependence, it's almost something that we should create a whole new panel for. It's a very interesting question. So dependence would require some kind of conversation, some kind of clarity, some kind of, mutual respect of, basic human rights and cultural sort of interests. So the question we're going to move to is the question about democracy. So the war in Ukraine has increasingly taken on a character of fighting for democracy at large, as if Ukraine is fighting for democracy for the entire world. But democracy as a system itself is very vulnerable, and it's always in a state of contestation. It's predicated on elections. And as we have seen in recent sort of electoral trends in the US and Europe, it is very much subject to extremes from far right to far left, and there's always drama associated with what kind of democracy there is. So in terms of Ukrainian democracy, even before the war, Ukraine was undergoing decommunization process, and now there's a language has developed to define itself as a state more and more in opposition to the past, to the Soviet past, which by default is considered left. We could talk about how it was very much a totalitarian in a way. But there is this strong speculation or maybe trepidation that in the aftermath of this war, Ukraine will drift towards a more conservative and a more nationalist political climate. So I would like to ask you, what are the dangers and possibilities for establishing a uniquely Ukrainian democracy, even if such thing possible? So please, who would like to take on this one first?
I may start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
The first thing which comes to my mind when we speak about like the Ukrainian unique way, if we can talk of this kind of notion at all, if
Right.
there is anything unique about our experience, is that the kind of Ukrainian democracy, like I put it in brackets, is definitely would be based on the horizontal structures and self-initiatives and some community-based things. And this is something which we as a society experienced first strongly after the Maidan 8 years ago, when it was all about being together, volunteering, and the first stage of war at Donbass in 2014 and 15 was all about creating groups and communities who did effective fundraising and who did effective supplies and did everything which the state basically failed to do, because it was completely unprepared for something that was happening in 2014. And this is something which we experience now, I think, with all these volunteering groups, with all these communities in different parts of Ukraine, which are working in a really effective way, and which are working in a really very horizontal and very kind of free and dynamic way. So I think if I mean, maybe it's again too early to talk about these initiatives as a you know, the first stage of establishing some kind of a new political model. Maybe it's just, you know, about something which will be destroyed and politicized and commercialized while it's been raised to a different level, if you know what I mean. But so far I can see the strongest kind of side, or the strongest part of what can be like the Ukrainian unique political way of living together is this very high, very true spirit of self-organization, of self-support, which proves to be a really effective one, which proves to be so powerful that it's possible to supply the whole army with necessary supplies, equipment, food, and whatsoever. So this is not only about, you know, just spending time together, but really it's about doing something which the state is supposed to be doing, but for many different reasons it's still not capable of covering everything. So then people come and communities come to help and to fulfill some part of the mission that this normally, or well, normally maybe is a bad word, but which the state is expected to do.
Okay, Katerina wants to jump in.
So my understanding, I will just talk a little bit about the dangers in establishing Ukrainian democracy. I would say that the dangers are pretty much the same for Ukrainian democracies as for all other democracies. And I think that the main thing that erodes democracy is inequality, and that's basically the reason for all these efforts after the World War II, which was also a very devastating war, and the efforts like in establishing the welfare state and all this kind of like support and like all these efforts to basically overcome economic consequences of this war is something that saved democracy. I would say that, yeah, that poverty, lack of housing, lack of education, food, it's something that extremely erodes democracy. And in Ukraine, the war is basically turns country into a ruin, into an economic ruin, and basically the war is extremely expensive. It's everything, like all the economic life, the economic life of the entire country is just like working for the war. So I think it's the main danger, that there will be still not enough efforts to overcome this inequality, and that this will be a main danger for Ukrainian democracy. But as Elizabeth already mentioned, that there is a possibility to overcome this danger with this very powerful political mobilization of Ukrainian society that is able to basically to fight corruption much more efficiently, I would say, than all this anti-corruption agencies and all this like programs to fight corruption. So I think like politically active people, and the war basically made everyone politically active now in Ukraine. It's a very big chance to be able to use the money that are given by the European Union, by the United States, to give this, to use this money in a correct way to overcome the inequalities that the war produces. So.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I really also like this Lisa's idea that the possibility for Ukrainian democracy is actually created by ineffectiveness of the state. But I guess Snyder also spoke about that the Ukrainian army is much more effective because it doesn't rely to the centralized government. So each, everyone get used to taking decisions themselves. So somehow weakness of the state and effectiveness of the state can contribute to democracy in a way. But also I wanted actually not to agree with this idea that these attempts to get rid of Soviet past is the threat to democracy with something contradictory to the building of democracy, because so of course Soviet state has some nice socialist benefits like free education or free medicine or so on, but it was everything but democratical state, and it was state built on the fear, on the total control of the citizens, on the total centralized economy, and so on and so on. And even when I observe these fights with the Soviet monuments in Ukraine, this decommunization fighting with monuments, I see it also, it's not about the meaning of those monuments, and it's not about the idea of socialism. I think for me, it's more about fight about the right to define how the public space will look like, because those monuments, regardless of their meaning, was put there without asking, the people whether they want those monuments or not. It was something imposed from above, violently. It was the attempt of the state to control public space and to control the people who are there. So when people now fighting against those monuments, they just probably want to reclaim their right to decide how their public space should be. And we can say here that, okay, but the communization laws were then made by the state. But then again, as immediately when these laws were produced by the state, there was a huge movement of the activists who started protecting those monuments. And we see these discussions, some people want to get rid of them, some people want to preserve them, some people see the values of them. And I think that this antagonism is the most actually important thing, that we have this discussion, that we are not just silently accepting the state politics, but we try to intervene. We try to also decide how we want to have our public space constructed. And this is the clashes in the society, these antagonisms that we have, these contradictions that we have. For me, it is the most precious thing for democracy, because if you will try, as you said, Slinko, that war is a very good premise to create a unity, a totality, and how, and everyone knows how Soviet Union used this idea of war and the external enemy to create this totalitarian state. That's the threat. The threat is to attempt to create this homogeneous society based on certain idea, certain identity, certain national idea. I think this is a threat. To create a democracy, we should embrace that, yes, we have some contradictions in society. We have some groups that have contradictory visions of how Ukraine should develop. We have this antagonism, and this is good actually. It's good that we can negotiate and sometimes have very strong discussions, but to preserve this possibility to embrace this antagonism, not only diversity, but the contradictions. This is very important, to give the space for them and to give the space for people to face that there are different views and different desires, and then try to find the way somehow to coexist within this antagonism. Thank you.
I see in your very heartfelt answers the very democracy I was asking about. This very the openness to embrace, not even embrace, that you consider different points of view, and unwillingness to homogenize the space, political space, cultural space, linguistic space, historic space. The basic takeaway from these answers to the last questions is no to homogenization, So, and that brings me to the second part of the questions, which is the questions designed for each of you individually, because you are individuals. So the first question is for Lizaveta. Lizaveta has quite a, kind of a movie deserving story of how she moved an art piece for the Venice Biennale Ukrainian Pavilion. And so the question is this: during this emergency time, when attention and energy is largely captured by physical and informational warfare, the concerns like cultural production can seem secondary or ineffective at best. So you, Lizaveta, have a very personal story of the curatorial team smuggling art to install at the Ukrainian pavilion, and at the same time you had to worry about how to deliver your own child. So could you elaborate on this idea of culture as a battlefield, and what cultural resources can be modelized to feed this metaphorical fountain of exhaustion in this time of war and the aftermath of the war? And I just want to say that Fountain of Exhaustion is a specific piece that Lizaveta might want to talk about.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this tailored questions, especially for me. Yeah, I must say that the only thing I smuggled was really my baby, which was born on the 3rd week of war, and which was 1 month old. Who was 1 month old when we reached Venice, and the actual art piece was evacuated by my fellow curator and kind of professional partner, Maria Lanko, who was the only one from our team who took the danger of the possible war seriously. And like something like a week ago, before the war started, when there were a lot of conversations running around that, yeah, what happens if the war starts? But she was the only one who really had a plan in her mind that if something happens, she can take the essential, non-replaceable element of the future Ukrainian pavilion in Venice, the actual 72 funnels, bronze custom-made elements, which took us 5 months to produce. So she decided that she can, in the worst case scenario, she can just drop them in her trunk of her private car and drive westwards somewhere to the EU border. And so she did, actually, on the 21st of February. She didn't do it in the morning, because in the morning it was chaos, and all of you perhaps have seen the striking images of 10 kilometers traffic jam on the road out of Kiev. But in the evening, on the first day of war, she made this decision, and she put these elements, this bronze 72 bronze pieces in her car and drove westwards. It then took her 5 days basically to reach the border, yeah, that's how she evacuated herself and the art piece. And basically, due to that, the project was possible because these elements were irreplaceable. But of course, we all were on a constantly calling each other, and we were in touch, in a constant touch with Pavlo Markov, the artist who was in Kharkiv and who couldn't leave Kharkiv for some time, and who stayed in the shelter, and who basically suffered the most out of all of us, because he was really under the shelling in the Kharkiv, which was heavily attacked in the first week of war. So we had different missions to complete. Markov, the artist, had a mission to also cross the border, because you cannot open the pavilion without the artist. The artist is the most important element of it, basically. Artist is as a human being. And then the main elements were evacuated, and then most of the team was securing the safe place to stay. And at certain moment we realized, we were also asking ourselves, why it is so important to do that. Obviously there are much more important things to do right now rather than open the art exhibition at the Vanity Fair, which the Venice Biennial is. But at the same time, we understood that this is sort of a mission. We really wanted to present the country not just as a war victim, not just as a survivor, but as a country which is still capable of doing important things on many different professional levels, and the country which has its independent cultural voice, and especially because this artistic voice, this cultural voice was overshadowed by a big Russian brother for many years, starting from Russian Empire and all the way through Soviet Union time, and in the recent years, of course. And at that moment we realized that this is it has become double important for us to present Ukraine as an independent and in a way powerful state. That much powerful that even in the times of war, it is capable of presenting the best it has its artists, its culture. And like coming back to my previous answer about self-initiatives, I don't want to sound unpatriotic, but this project was first and foremost has become possible due to enormous energy and enormous efforts put by every team member of our pavilion, which is about like 15 people: architects, designers, website producers, curators, the artists, the family of the artists. And but the state itself, represented by the Ministry of Culture, unfortunately didn't invest the same amount of efforts as we do. And again, I don't want to criticize, I don't want to sound unpatriotic, I don't want to blame the state, which was, the Ministry of Culture was not designed and was totally unprepared to be active in the wartime period, and it had much more perhaps important things to do, like preserving the museum collections and preserving some cultural heritage objects. So in this light, maybe the Venice Biennial is not the main important task, but in the situation when the Venice Biennial isn't the priority for the state, it has become the priority for the people which were selected through the competition on competition basis to do it. And we, as these people who were given this mission this year, we thought that this is perhaps the best thing we can do for our country now. Like, I cannot volunteer with a little baby, on my lap. I don't know, like our architects and our male part of the team, they are not, suitable to go to the army right now, So the best thing we can do is to try to do our job as good as we can. And in the end, I think this was the right strategy, because in the end, the National Pavilion attracted a lot of attention, a lot of media attention, but also a lot of political attention, because the pavilion was visited by many representatives of many different countries. In fact, I was surprised that many politicians, like the president of Estonia or the ministers of culture from almost every country, do visit Venice Biennial. So it's like it's the quite important place for them to visit. Just I didn't know, really. I was thinking that only artists and maybe some kind of state officials from ministers of culture would attend it, but it was really attended by many like high-ranked politicians, and all of them paid a visit to Ukrainian pavilion. Of course, not because they suddenly have become fans of Ukrainian art. Of course, they were doing it with just political mission, but this was the moment when we realized that actually having this very physical space to represent our country and having people there to speak on behalf of its country has become really important, because we were there, we were able to speak, we were able to advocate, we were able to tell true stories to media, and like many important media, like, I don't know, New York Times or Guardian were there to interview us. And of course, they were interviewing not only about artistic merits of Pavlo Markov's sculpture, but they were, of course, asking questions about the war. And this was the decisive moment for us, when we were given the mic, given the stage, and we were able to speak. So in the end, maybe all this business with bringing the fountain of exhaustion to Venice was all about having this moment of visibility for the country. And answering the question about the fountain of exhaustion and its symbolical meaning, of course, this project was the concept of the project came to Pavlo Markov in early 90s. It was very much rooted into this immediate post-Soviet context of Kharkiv, the city, the big city, quite close to the Russian border, Russian-speaking city, with also some kind of cultural and historical ties with Russian Empire, because the city was quite important during the Russian Empire times, not even the Soviet Union times. And the idea was very much rooted to this 90s context. And like in year 2022, we finally kind of realized this concept, because during this 27 years, artist didn't produce it. He only had the idea, but then the pavilion at Venice Biennial actually gave him a chance to produce it, to produce the physical object, the fountain, filled with water. And of course, this is, I don't like to talk about, I don't like this idea of kind of art as a prediction and artist as a prophets in this kind of esoterical way. But this project has become not prophetic, but perhaps it showed that this idea of the country as the idea of exhaustion of old. By saying old, I mean, of course, also like Soviet-based, old political, economical, and social relationship are totally exhausted. But they are not exhausted for Ukraine only, but they're exhausted for this old narrative, which Soviet Union was trying to bring to our country, but also the narrative which Russian Federation still uses and still elaborates. And in the end, what was the symbol of political, economical, and social exhaustion suddenly become the symbol of exhaustion of humanity, which is, of course, what the Russian Federation is now showing the world. Yeah, so I think like as any good art piece, if I may use the word good for art, the Pavlo Markov's piece Fountain of Exhaustion has showed something which was always there, but perhaps was not that much visible to all of us, but was visible to the artist with his specific sensitivity and specific optics.
Thank you for this, you know, kind of like exposing more around the piece. I just realized while you were speaking that I was actually going to art school in Kharkiv in the 90s. So it just hit me. And then I left Ukraine in 96. So when you say like this exhaustion, economic post-Soviet space, the economic collapse of the post-Soviet years, is very close to heart, close to my experience. It's a very interesting period. And I think with this, you know, distance of historic time, we might just look back at it more and more, because that's exactly when the transition to nationhood of Ukraine has begun. You know, like that's the first time Ukraine has become officially independent and defined by its borders, by its state. Now I want to switch and talk about something that is quite dark, or not, I don't know. It's let's just say I want to switch to the question that's for Katerina, and her PhD is on, she's working on her PhD, which is on abortions in the Soviet Union. I have to say I don't know anything about her, you know, extraneous and big theme there, but I thought when I learned about that, I thought that right now was a good time to kind of highlight this, because as we know, there's two different kinds of wars that we could talk about. One is the war perpetrated by the Russian soldiers on Ukrainian women. There's all these crimes, and it's not just women, it's also children and men in some cases. And there is also this conservative war on women's bodies in America, which is the, you know, the conservative judiciary assault on the women's right for abortion here. So Katerina, would you talk more about your PhD research on abortions in the Soviet Union and how this current context that I just described can inform our ideas of women's bodies used as battlefields, both in the warfare and in ideology?
Thank you, Slinko, for your question. And I'm just gonna try to combine the two. Yeah, basically these are very different topics. I mean, the war crimes and what's going on in the US, in the Supreme Court. But yeah, there is this common ground between them, that it's like violence that comes from the state. It's basically an order from above that the order that basically violates my body integrity, violates the body integrity of every woman. These are both the orders that to the Russian soldiers to rape and women, and the order coming from the Supreme Court. It's an order that says that basically the woman's body does not belong to her, that there can be that her sovereignty can be like totally violated. And my dissertation is also about this kind of like violence from the state in the Soviet times, and you know, in the Soviet Union, it was a very dynamic history of abortion. So first, abortions in 1920, the Soviet Union was the first country in the world that legalized abortion on demand, and it had a very profound impact on the struggle for abortion rights around the world. But then there was Stalinism, and 1936, when abortions were again banned, and basically it was this demographic reason, and in the US it has been mostly religious reasons for this abortion bans. And even now, it's still basically a kind of a religious reason, if I understand it correctly. But basically, they have a common ground that women are not recognized as whole subjects, and their decisions basically do not matter. That's what in the Soviet Union, and that's something that we see now in the US. But my dissertation is not so dark, and actually it offers some optimism to all these struggles for reproductive rights. My dissertation is a microhistory, and it's based on a memoir of one doctor, of an obstetrician gynecologist who worked during the late Stalinism and later, and she performed abortions both legally and in this kind of like gray zone, rather beyond the limits of the law. And my dissertation is basically showed this how one woman, she was a woman, how she was able to do something that was to change the situation. Basically, it's about the power of one person to who was both a representative of the state, but at the same time she was performing a legal abortion. So it's kind of like what one person can do in this situation of like of abortion surveillance, of something that the United States is like heading for, to the situation when abortion is no more legal. So there is an abortion underground, and so my study is about how to evade these orders, how to evade instructions, how to do something when abortion is illegal. Basically it showed that it was not her only individual decision. So there were many like authorities, the party, and the hospital administration, and many other people who basically supported her in the way how she performed the illegal abortion. So they turned a blind eye to this practice of illegal abortion, because as I argue, it was still the legacy of the 1920s, and there was a basic general like common understanding among her environment in the hospital that it is a right, even if it was not pronounced as the right of every person to regulate their reproduction. It was still like unofficially considered as a right. So the Soviet Union actually shows us that there was during the entire 70 years of the Soviet abortion history, there was still a constant struggle for defining abortion as a right. And it was finally, there was in 1955, abortion was legalized on demand, and it was considered like here in the Western, let's say, like Cold War scholarship. It's what is called abortion culture. The consequences of this law, they were usually labeled as abortion culture. But it basically showed that there is still a lot of suspicion to abortion as an ordinary part of women's life. So that's why this kind of negative term, abortion culture. My dissertation basically shows a kind of like optimistic future even to the current situation with Roe and Wade, so that changes are possible, that there is still that this kind of rights that which are very much contested, they have been contested in much more, let's say, rigid and monolithic power as the Soviet Union. So there is still a chance that they here this struggle for reproductive rights will be won here in the US. Because this is something very important, and it has the power to mobilize people. And doctors, they are also not just the neutral expert. They're not just some kind of like instruments of biopolitics. They're not just some kind of like tools of the state to regulate tools of violence over women's bodies. So doctors can be on the side of women, and doctors can be a very powerful tool for female emancipation.
I just wanted to also kind of drop in there a side note that I was reading something about Putin's concern about the falling demographics in Russia, and how one of his methods to repopulate Russia is basically by conquest of Ukrainian bodies or any other Russian-speaking bodies, and forcible kidnapping basically of people, so he could basically say that the birth rate, while it's falling, the population is growing. So that was interesting for me to learn. I didn't know that was another sort of like speculative reason why he's waging this war. But we kind of have to be mindful of the time, and I wanna move to the last question, after which we will field questions from the audience, which you could probably just type into the chat. My last question is to Lesia, and Lesia is teaching a very specific course called Violence of the Image. And I have personally kind of experienced this like a very surreal like way to observe the war, which is basically on my phone, through Telegram, through news feeds, through personal chats. And so when we're inundated by the images of violence and war on various platforms, whether it's mainstream or less edited channels like Telegram, we can acknowledge that over time, the impact of these images, such as explosions, bombings, wounded and killed civilians, they become desensitized. And it kind of has an effect of fading attention from the events. The attention gets diverted to other things. You become kind of like unable to process. So based on your teachings, Lesia, of the course Violence of the Image, could you talk about the value, the purpose, and the mechanisms that these violent images provide in bearing witness to the event?
Thank you, Slinko, so much for this question. I'm really grateful for it. Honestly, I don't have like defined answers, but I definitely think a lot about the things that you're talking about all those images of violence and violent images. And I will like share with you my thoughts in progress. And then I'll be happy to discuss it with you. But like the main thing that I am discussing during my course, Violence of the Image, is actually a performativity of images, is a capacity of image to affect the viewer somehow. So I claim that our perception of image is never like just a contemplation. It's always some certain interaction. And I claim that images can affect us in different ways, like they can rouse emotions and so on, but they can also make us act in certain way. But I need to specify that I'm speaking here about public images. So I mean the images that we encounter publicly, like I mean here social media as well. Why it is important? Because when we encounter an image publicly, we encounter it in front of the gaze of the other people. And here I need to say that like each society has like certain protocols of the interactions with images. For example, like if you are a believer and you see the icon, you pray or you cross. If your friends show you the pictures of his like or her kids, you say, wow, it's so cute. Or if you see some like ancient classic paintings in the museum, you admire them. So there are like certain culturally established reactions to the images, and actions, right, in response to certain images. And in this case, I think that when we speak about these images of violence that we are discussing, it doesn't actually matter how much sensitive we are, because what do we really feel? Because there are certain protocols of reaction to these images. And if you see the images of the crimes, of atrocities, and the key moment here, like the key point here, that when those images are public, and you encounter those images in the public space, in the public sphere, like in media or in social media and so on, then those images put you in the situation where like everyone know that you know about it. That's probably the most important point. You cannot behave as if you don't know about it. So you know, you have this information, and everyone knows that you have this knowledge. Everyone knows that you know this, that you have this information. And now you kind of expected to show your reaction, your attitude towards it. And it doesn't matter what you really feel, but you know that like society expects certain actions from your side. And in the case of the images of violence from Ukraine, I think this is like the most powerful thing is how they influence the political decisions. Because when politicians saw these images, and like everyone knows that those images are accessible for those politicians, and this is the images of crimes. It's like in a judge, you know, it's like in a court. It doesn't matter if judge feels something or no, it's just a witness of a crime. And if it's a witness of a crime, the minimum that you can do, that you should do, is like to start investigation. And then if you have some other like proofs, then you need to take some steps further, like to take some measures. And that's how they function, actually, those images. It's not the matter of emotions, it's the matter of, it's like it's an evidence. It's evidence of crimes, and if it's proved, then we need to react somehow, because that's how we have some laws, we have some rules, and we have to follow them. So that's why I think, of course, and we saw it actually. We saw when the images of Bucha were publicly published. We saw how the world reacted. Like Ukraine received much more support from different politicians, because they just cannot pretend that nothing is going on anymore. Everyone is watching them and expecting their reaction. So that's, of course, the great value of those images. But I also wanted, if I have a little bit more time, I also wanted to discuss another, like a flip side of it. Because now I just talked about people who have some tools to react. They have some like power, and they need to perform somehow their power in reaction to those images. But let's think about those people, like peaceful people who, I'm speaking here mostly about Ukrainians, who also encounter those images, but they cannot react immediately. They don't have this power to influence the situation. What would be their reaction? It is a very interesting question. And when those images from Bucha came, I experienced it myself, that those images are literally killing you, because you see this, but you cannot do anything. And your reaction is a depression and a feeling of guilt. And I read a lot of posts on Facebook when people wrote that I cannot watch like in the mirror to myself, I cannot live anymore, like why am I alive and those people are dead. And it is a terrible thing that people who are not guilty actually feel guilty, and they start, and this is self-destructive feelings actually. They start feeling like as if they don't have right to live, and so on and so on, and somehow they start a war against themselves. Why does it happen? And actually the answer to this question exists, and it was described very well by Sigmund Freud 100 years ago. He described the origins of the feeling of guilt. What is it actually? The feeling of guilt is actually an aggression, is a rage that you cannot translate into action against those who hurt you. So the only thing that you can do is turn it inwards against yourself. And yeah, so this is something that we should understand, that those images are powerful witness, of course, but also they are dangerous. And we should remember that this theater of violence is a very ancient strategy that was used to perform power, to establish power. Like, you know, these different rulers of different times used it to create this very spectacular theater, a stage of brutal violence, because those images of violence can create also a fear. It can create the feeling of importance, that you cannot do anything, the feeling of guilt because you cannot do anything. And this is the bench of self-destructive feeling that would kill those people who are still alive somehow, you know. So the images of killed people could continue like killing those people who are still alive, who survived. That's why my point is that it is very important to have this witness. But and another thing that I wanted to tell you, that like the easiest way to somehow to get rid of this feeling of guilt, to act at least somehow, is to share these images. You know, this is, you can contribute at least somehow to this kind of fight, because if you cannot go, if you're not a soldier, if you're not a politician, you don't have like much options how to contribute to this situation. So at least you can share those images, and then you feel at least some release because you somehow contributed to something, to sharing the truth and so on and so on. And that's how those images become viral, you know. So because of our feeling of guilt and feeling of empathy, somehow also we make those feeling viral, those images of atrocities of raped women, raped kids, humiliated people, dead people, viral. And this is something dangerous, I think. We should be careful about it. And also those like viral images of violence create certain representation of Ukraine, like representation as of ultimate victims. And this, as you know, everybody, I mean, it's described by many theories that representation can shape reality in a certain way, because it creates conditions for interaction, for relationships, for like identity, for subjectivity. And it's not, I mean, it's not that simple. That's why I think, of course, there is a job of journalists or other people who should take these witnesses of war and make them public. But I am, as a curator, I think that that my task is to somehow create this space for different representations of Ukraine, you know, to create the space for different images, different representation, different narratives, and I think this is also very, and that's why I appreciate what Lisa said, that they wanted to make this pavilion not about war, because it's very important to keep the right to speak not only about war, not only about our victimhood, to keep this diversity, to keep this richness of culture, of dialogue, of like conversation. This is something very important that we need to keep. That's why I think that the task of art is opposite, not to share those images, because we already know about it, it's already shared. So I think the task of art is to preserve the space for something, for different images, for different like stories, for different narratives, for different conversations. This is, I think, something very important. While media share and like spread and reproduce those images of death, I think the task of art is to create the space for life, and life is actually a diversity, is a multiplicity. Thank you.
Okay. I just want maybe to, if it, like we have like 1.5 minutes, there is like an aspect of this question that even when someone sees them and knows they're factual, for example, like Russian propaganda has said that they are fake. You know, what would you kind of comment on that? Like,
of course, someone said that they are fake, and of course, this is also one of this reaction of like defense reaction of to defend yourself, not to do anything, just to say that it's fake. If it's fake, then we don't have to do anything. But still, luckily, we have certain protocols again in society that requires then a further investigation. So if someone claims that it's fake, okay, let's go there, and then let's start investigation, and then we'll see that it's not fake actually, you know. So, but it's working, luckily.
Well, thank you so much, all our panelists, for answering all these really complicated and emotional questions. I know this is very hard for you because you're really like right in it. As myself and a lot, I'm sure, in our audience, we have direct connections to Ukraine through family, friends, So I appreciate everybody being here. And now we're going to move to Carolyn is going to field the questions from the audience for us.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Slinko. Those questions were really incredible. So our first, I'd love to turn it to Katya to ask first. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Carolyn, and thank you everyone for raising a lot of issues and themes and a lot to think about. Thanks for being here. I want to ask a question. I think it's very simple, but at the same time difficult. But everyone's asking me how I am, but I'm in the West, currently in Australia, far away. I want to ask you, how are you coping? How are you? And how are you feeling about the future? Is it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time? Just anyone, if you feel like answering. Thank you.
I can answer shortly. I mean, I feel like privilegedly secured. I'm out of Ukraine. I stay in Austria right now, and of course, as many other Ukrainians who stay, or like, I would put it like it might be more precise, like more people from Kiev, because I'm from Kiev. I was born in Kiev. Like many people who left Kiev during the war, and many of them are now coming back and like sharing the news, how wonderful Kiev is now and how great it is to be back home. So, and me and as many other people who are outside of Kiev are kind of finding the temptation to also come back and to be there to witness this unique historical moment, so to say. But I also try to fight this temptation inside of me, because first of all, I understand that I have a family to take care of, and I cannot do it really in Kiev. That's why I left the city, because it was just dangerous and not comfortable. By saying comfortable, I don't mean go to have a cappuccino outside of my place, but uncomfortable in terms of, reaching for food supplies and all this kind of stuff. Now it's much more better, but it was much worse in the beginning of the war. So, and the second thing is that I realized that I am of no use in Kiev right now. As I said, I cannot volunteer. I cannot do my job in Kiev right now, because in Kiev, I co-own the gallery, and the gallery is now cannot perform in Kiev, basically. The space is open. We have an exhibition there right now, but it's more for community, for people just to spend time in, but it's not, we cannot sustain the business in these circumstances. So I kind of find this temptation, and also try to be truthful to myself that, my desire to go back to Kiev, in fact, is not that much about being useful, but to be there, to witness the moment, to enjoy the moment. So it's a little bit egoistic, from my side. This desire is not productive. It's more for myself rather than for actual help. So but I feel fine. I feel privileged to have a place to stay, to be able to do my job. First of all, because a part of motherhood, I'm trying to, together with colleagues, I'm trying to find new ways to operate the gallery, to support the artists who are, in a way, for whom we bear some responsibility, to support them, to sell their art. I feel responsibility for a couple of team members to whom we have to pay salaries, to keep them, also be able to pay their bills and to buy food and all these kind of things. So I can see that, yeah. So if to say short, I feel privileged because I'm safe, I'm with my family, and I'm able to work. Thank you for this question.
Thank you. Thanks for your answer.
Thank you.
Okay, I can, I guess, answer something similar to Elizaveta, because also I left Kiev the first day after the bombing, because I also have a 4-year-old kid. So that was clear for me that I cannot just stay there, because somehow I was expected the worst scenarios. Also, many people, when the war started, we called to the mom of my husband, because she has a car, and she we suppose that she will bring us by the car somewhere to the border or to some safe space, but she decided to stay because she believed that nothing really bad would happen, you know. And many people like reacted like that. She said, okay, they will never hit civilians, it will be probably just some infrastructural objects and so on. So many people stayed because of that, but I somehow was prepared for the worst scenario, so I decided to leave immediately. I was really frightened, and it was I mean, I didn't think much further when I took this decision. It was just an idea that we have to escape. And then I mean, I feel really grateful to all these people who helped us, because we went by chance. We took a bus to Izmail, which is a city in the border with Romania. Then we get to Romania without any friends there, any people, like we knew no one there. But then through the Facebook, I connected with some cultural workers, and they tremendously helped us. And this is one of my like discoveries, thanks to this war, paradoxically, that you know, I discovered like a huge support and solidarity from the people I never met before. And this is really touching. This is really something like that I appreciate, that I have this experience, because when we left, I mean, we expected like for everything, you know, and then in the end, I end up in Bucharest for months, and now I'm in Rome, hosted by Swiss Institute and so on. And all this tremendous help from people, I think this is very important. I think the fact that war activates all those, like, you know, connections between people who are not connected, you know, by anything, just by the fact that they are human. This is something very important and something that I'm really grateful. Thank you.
So when the war started, it was late evening in Arizona. I woke up my parents, and I was just like shaking from fear for my parents who were in Kyiv. And basically I felt extremely happy that I am with my baby, with my husband. We are in a safe place. But every day for the next couple of months, I was like going to bed and waking up during the night and reading news about Kyiv, because my parents decided to stay. They had no way to leave because my grandfather is 93 years old, and in general they decided that they're not going to leave the city. And a few times I talked with them when they were hiding in a bathroom, in a hallway, and that was really scary, because I was like, oh my God, maybe right now I'm just gonna sometimes I had this fear that we were talking on a video call, and something horrible might just happen when we are just talking. That was like my imagination was just like giving me this horrible pictures, and I being in here in this safety far away from home, I felt extremely isolated, because I felt like it's my war and everybody else were just like been living their ordinary lives. I mean, I felt huge support from people who were just like bringing food to us, saying good words, texting me. But at the same time, I felt that it's my war. It's just like consumes everything in my life. But for people around, it's not their war actually. But then I found something to do. I started to organize some fundraising events, and then I started this kind of like, let's say, kind of war against those who were saying, oh, Russian people are suffering. So I started this kind of like small war inside the inside the US academia against this kind of like huge support for Russians, let's say, and how much, and talking about how much they suffer. So I felt some kind of relief that I can do something about this war, and I just felt a little bit better. And then finally, when there is not this kind of like immediate danger for my relative, for my parents in Kyiv, I just feel now much better.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for those answers and for your question, Katya. I'm going to turn it to Janet next. Just ask you to unmute. You should be able to. Janet K. Oh yeah, great.
Oh, I just asked I posted the question online in the chat. Should I just read from it then?
Yeah, go.
Okay. So, as I said, to follow up on the question of Ukrainian independence, can Ukraine be more independent after the war? Or are Ukrainians now trapped in a proxy war between the United States and Russia? A war from which Ukraine will either be quite dependent on the West for rebuilding, etc., and also recipients of neoliberal austerity that the West will deliver? Or will it emerge more dependent on Russia? Finally, is there a more hopeful vision to either of these sides, to either of these poles?
I could try to answer, if I may.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, yeah. So I don't have like precise answer, but I was thinking about this also, of course. So I can just share my thoughts because, of course, this is an important question and it's not easy to answer. And probably Katya, who is a historian, then add something to this, and she knows better. But I remember it even from my like school lessons from history, that our painful relationships with Russia started when Russia was our allies in the fight against a fight for independence from Poland. So once Bogdan Khmelnytsky established those partnership with Russia, they helped us to get independent from Poland, and then it ended up with this very long and painful history of dependence from Russia. So of course, we need to admit that we cannot win in this war without help of other more strong partners. That's reality. We have to face it. And we have to also understand and realize that receiving this support, of course, would create certain dependency of those who are helping us now. Of course, it's not for free, and you should realize that nothing is that simple. And I think that probably, as I can imagine that the strategy is to first you should face it, that you are dependent de facto, that you need this help, that you depend on some other states, and of course you will depend after the world will over, because we will again need some help to rebuild the country and so on and so on. So this dependency will be there. But if you realize it, then probably you can try to think and to build some strategy how to manage and how to get rid of it, but not immediately, but through some long and probably not easy way. But to move this way, you need to understand what's going on, because if you now will shout that we are such a wonderful and brave, and we and that we win the Russia and so on, and we should realize the real situation, that we have this support and we will have this dependency, and we should work with it. That's a task. That's how I see it.
I'm just gonna add that the difference between being dependent on Western aid and its neoliberal austerity program and the other option of being occupied by Russia, I would prefer Ukraine to be dependent on Western aid, because we know what does it mean to be occupied by Russia. We know what happened in Mariupol and in Bucha and in Irpin. So that's a very big difference. So, I hope that Ukraine will survive and will be able to rebuild itself through this kind of not of course without any problems, but of course with this aid and its programs and its bureaucrats and its kind of limitations, but it would be the best option for Ukraine.
No, I totally agree with Katerina, because when it comes to, you know, the questions of, bringing people back to their homes, or not to their homes, but to building new houses and providing food and providing necessary support to rebuild the economics and to bring people back to normal life, basically, you know, to satisfy their survival needs. Of course, you need help, and any country would need a help in this situation. And it's not about, you know, we shouldn't also look at that as a total dependence, like political or ideological dependence, but also in the same time, you know, when I think about what is happening now, I also see Ukraine as not just a country that, and it's not my idea. I think it's been said by many people that Ukraine is now basically fighting not for itself, but also fighting for the, I'm sorry for this kind of outdated notion, for the Western world, you know, and it basically protects and pays with real human victims to protect not on its own land, but to protect the bigger part of the world. So, you know, it's not just the question, you know, you can also look at the situation as not just as a, you know, making a decision to be dependable on someone, but also as a, you know, kind of receiving the reward for the job done, not only for your own country, but for the rest of the world as well.
Thank you all for those answers. I want to be mindful of the time. Some people, it's like 5 a.m. for you now. I can't thank you all enough. We're just so incredibly grateful and lucky to be able to hear from you all today. That was truly an amazing conversation. Thank you, Slinko, for such thoughtful, rigorous questions. Thank you, Lesia, Elizaveta, Katerina, Katya. We'd also like to thank, in absence, Adriana Farmiga for helping to make kind of this series possible too. We usually end with a poetry reading. Today, we're not doing that. We'd really like to highlight the links we're about to put in the chat. We just got one from Katerina. So, you know, we just urge you to actually take a look at those. And yeah, there will be a sort of part 3 or extension of this in June. So stay tuned, and you can all turn on your microphones, say goodbye, hello, goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh my God. Thank you so much.
Stay safe.
So much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was great.
Slava
That was
Ukraini.
amazing. Thank you.
Слава Україні. Слава Україні.
Unbelievable.
Слава Україні!